Good morning, Tim.
Good morning.
Good to see you. As I sit here, just as an aside, it's 17 years since we met in Glastonbury, and
Wow.
that for me was the start of jumping on. I had seen you before, but jumping on with what became the mystery experience, became the Deep Awakening then, and we sat around having meetings about creating that. And it is, I think, 17 years tomorrow that happened. So
Wow. Is that right? Wow,
there we go. Yeah,
that's
since
wow.
St. Mary's Church Hall, wasn't it? We did those things.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh my goodness. That's wow.
Anyway, that bit of nostalgia is interesting to no one else. So let's proceed with the.
Blow me away.
So we've done a couple of discussions on your work and how it contrasts to the previous more idealist view, and then coming in with questions of me, who was there for that period, and then is trying to understand the transition. And I thought today I'd like to go over some of that metaphysical stuff in slightly more detail. I've also had the advantage of recently I have reread or re-listened anyway to a lot of your books because I assisted in putting them into audiobook format using Amazon's new AI system. If you're in the United States where this technology is being tested, you can get most of Tim's books in audio format now, and it is really good actually compared to any of the software that's been available to now. It's like a bit of a quantum leap in the way it knows to pronounce things and so on. It struggles with things like rhetorical questions, but it is really very listenable. So,
How does it do with my name?
Freke. Yeah, so that it doesn't do. So it makes a mistake in the first line, and after that,
I
we're
don't
pretty
mind.
good.
I'm
It's
used to
your
it.
name, and a lot of the Islamic Sufi mystics can't
Right,
do that. Okay,
right,
but the Greeks and
right,
everything, it's fine with.
right.
And it refuses to any sort of word that's like a swear word or something. It pretends that it doesn't know. It's like a polite Victorian lady or something. Like just very clearly, you clearly do know how to say that. So, one of the books I was particularly looking at was The Laughing Jesus. Okay, and this is a book that I don't know has got the same level of attention as some of the others because it was late in the Jesus series, but also it's called The Laughing Jesus, which makes you think it's more about Jesus than it really is. And it came out around the same time as Lucid Living. And I hear you emphasize this very pithy way you express the philosophy in Lucid Living, whereas The Laughing Jesus contains this longer treatise on your thoughts. And I think it seems like those two books are a kind of point of individuation for you from writing about mystical philosophy and about the mystics to stepping out into a more individuated position where you suddenly become critical for the first time of particularly the East. Okay. So where that leads into what I'd like to talk about is on the first interview we did, I got back to the origin of the universe and I drew an analogy between really questioning, can the universe come from something very, very simple? Okay. So my analogy was to a seed, or let's say a daffodil bulb. Okay. That if you have the flower of the daffodil, you can reduce it down and reduce it down, reduce it down to when it's this bulb at some point. But that bulb contains the information to create the daffodil. And I drew an analogy between that and the universe. That, okay, you go back right to the point of the Big Bang, to the point of whatever, existence coming into existence, and you have this very dense point, but that seems to me to be like a seed or a bulb, that it contains right there the information to create all the rest. Okay. And you critique that point in a way that wasn't clear to me. It's become a little clearer from watching the series as it's unfolded, like the origins of everything. But I'm going to be a bit long-winded. I'm going to read to you a quote from The Laughing Jesus, from Where Your Mind Was At 20 Years Ago, which seems to go along with what I'm saying. So I think I'll say all that, and then I'll leave it for you to comment on. Okay, so the cosmos is simply too absurd to have been a conscious plan of a wise being. Look at how haphazardly history is. How many of its false starts there have been in the creative process. If there is a creator God, he clearly doesn't know what he's doing. Yet the cosmos is also too ordered and organized not to be seen as arising from some form of intelligence. And the fact that intelligence comes out of the cosmos proves that intelligence must exist implicitly within the source of the cosmos. The Gnostic conception of God as the life dreamer solves these conundrums. The life dream is not some formulated conscious plan. The life dream is arising from unconscious awareness, which is becoming conscious of its nature through the process of evolution. Okay, so I think that seems to me that aligns with the point I'm making, and
Yes.
you've gone somewhere different. So I hand it over to you. What's wrong? What's wrong with Tim Freke in 2005? Now, what's he getting at?
Well, quite a bit, but let's just focus on what's wrong in that paragraph. So that's a transition, I think, for me, from really clearly going, look, these old ideas of God creating the universe as a conscious being or as in somehow with intention, and that doesn't work. But maybe we can rescue this idea by going, yeah, there is a big mind, but it's kind of not conscious yet, and it's going to project itself. And it's that myth of it's coming to know itself through the universe. This is not my story. It's been explored by all sorts. Jacob Boehm comes to mind. All sorts of mystics have explored this idea. It's a kind of a panentheism. The universe is God exploring its own nature to discover what it is. And that is a transition idea for me to where I've ended up, which is going, yes, that, except we don't need the God at the beginning. And actually that's a weakness. It's a continuation of a mythic understanding, which we don't need. So that the great revelation, I think, has been, look, we can see this as the evolution of intelligence, not arising from intelligence. And that points to a different ontology, and recently I've been trying to soften it for folks, because it feels like, oh, you're taking away something at the beginning, and it's like, what is there? Nothing. Doesn't mean all of that. So I've kind of found myself framing it in Taoist terms, because Taoism has been a big influence on me, and I think it shows in where I've ended up. So in Taoism, you get this idea of there's the Tao, which is described, that there's one line where it just goes, the Tao is empty, but it is the mother of all things. So that's essentially what I'm saying. There is something, we can call it, I call it being, but you could call it Tao, or you could call it non-dual, or you could, which is in itself nothing in particular, has no qualities. And yet it is arising as everything. It's not an intelligence that just exists, although it's unconscious, whatever that could possibly mean. It's not anything. But it's like an empty sheet of paper that can have anything drawn on it. It's a field which can arise as any information. Or if we use the more ancient spiritual language, let's call it the Tao, because it sounds a bit more, ooh, it's the Tao. And the Tao arises as a uniduality, meaning it arises as the one that is two. And that is explicitly what it says in the Tao Te Ching, which is interesting to me. And that two-ness is yin and yang. Now, that yin and yang is not anything in particular. It's not any particular polarity or any particular relationship. It is the archetype of every relationship. And from that essential the fact that there's a one piece of information, which is itself a relationship, is going to come all relationships and all information. And it's that division of, or its complexity of relationship, which is the evolution of intelligence. Now, why that seems so much better to me is that, first of all, I've got away from all mythic ideas. Now, I love myth. I adore it. But in the same way that I love stories, because stories they work on a narrative level to create, like poetry, understanding. But if we want ontology, we need to go beyond it now. That's the old way of doing business. And the reason I think it's wrong is it takes ideas from a very emergent level of the process of becoming and puts them in areas that they don't belong. So it takes ideas like a big mind, it takes ideas like intentionality, wanting to know itself, all sorts of things which have got no business on this primal level where the Tao is arising as yin and yang. And the Tao is empty. It has no qualities. But this is the Tao, because it is in the process of becoming everything. This is the becoming. So we're in the Tao now. It's just that in itself it is empty. And yet it has come into relationship. It's in relationship with itself. And there's a fundamental oneness then, because it's the thing that makes the two poles one is the oneness. I call it being because it's the quality everything has. It's the simplest quality that we can see, which is why everything has it, although everything is different in every other respect. And that flow of becoming or forming, we're in it. That's the flow of the Tao. And so whichever, you can use that old language or you could use the modern language I use in my pod book. But the vision seems so much more plausible, and it's so much more parsimonious. It doesn't need you to assume a big mind it doesn't take all that mythic idea and try and transform it and push it into a form that can make sense.
Okay, I'll come back to the question of plausibility in a minute. So if I was to just hold up the theistic and atheistic position, so the atheistic position, I think that has been developed by people like Lawrence Krauss in A Universe for Nothing, could be said to be, if we can get back to something that's just really, really, really simple, like the simplest thing imaginable, and even prior to any sort of concept of matter, just mathematical equations, something before that, and you can have a point where a universe can come into being from there. And even if that's a hard thing to grasp, well, what's the alternative? That you put something more complex before that. So it just seems like you have to trend back to simplicity. Whereas a theistic position, and I must confess, this is something I've only come to understand better recently as being something more sophisticated than saying, well, there's a big mind at the beginning, is like I think we see it through Thomas Aquinas, but it comes through the Islamic philosopher Ibn Sina, the idea of the proof of the truth, or the idea that everything we know, everything that exists, comes from something else. So if you can see a chain then going back and back and back forever, if you don't want this infinite regression, the fact that anything exists infers that there must be another order of being that we don't ever experience that can bring existence into being without itself having to be brought into being. So the idea that there has to be something other than what we know, and the fact that this necessitates that. And I think that's, however well or poorly I've represented it, the better kind of theistic position on existence, that you either need this other property to get everything going, or you don't. You just need simplicity. It sounds like you're aligning much more with the idea of you can just get back to simplicity. And
Yes. So my basic thesis now would be, look, this is a process of becoming. That's what existence is. And that process of becoming is one in which the present is an expression, a continuation of what's come before. But that goes back and back and back. And I think it then goes before space, which we can see with the quantum level, and then before matter, which we can also see with that, go into information. And then I suspect before time, which is something which physics is now exploring. And as we do that, we lose more and more and more concepts that can only exist later. So obviously, like intentionality and all that, that's not going to come until the biological level. But as you go back, and you go back before time, then we have to talk about emergence in a pre-temporal way. So you might look at mathematical relationships and go, well, there's an emergent relationship between a cube and a square. But it's not temporal. You can't say, how long does it take for a square to become a cube? It doesn't. It's not to do with time anymore. And you could also go, well, what causes that? Well, nothing. It's not causal. Causality is going to come later. So this whole thing of there was a time that we go back to and then what's the first cause is all based on not having a sophisticated enough understanding of the process of emergence. And the ancient philosophers obviously didn't have that. They didn't know any of this. And so perfectly understandably, they ask those kind of questions. And it falls into something which human beings have always done, which is gone, well, something lesser must come from something greater. So this must come from something which is already there, which can do it. Whereas I think what we've understood is, in the whole process of evolution, that actually something greater comes from something lesser, because the complexification of information leads to it being more than. And that also cuts through reductionism. That also cuts through the idea that we can be reduced to the lower levels, which is often what people associate with a view like this. Oh, really, it's just maths then, is it? It's like, no, it's really everything, because every moment is more than what the moment before. And so the fact that you and I are here as human beings experiencing soul and God and life and music and joy and pain and everything, that can't be reduced to the lower levels. but neither can we understand the lower levels with the language or the ideas which are appropriate to this level. We need to see the process of emergence going back and back and back.
Okay, so the criticism that's often made of the new atheist ontology of this popping out of a universe from nothing, okay, is it's like they're saying, just allow me one miracle and I will explain the rest. Okay, so it's supposed to be this thing that doesn't have miracles in it, and everything is naturalistic, but they still need the one miracle to get the ball rolling with why existence comes into being. So does that criticism, do you feel, could that also be applied to what you're saying?
I don't think so.
Are you, no?
I don't think so. No. I mean, first of all, I think it's all pretty miraculous. The whole thing, every single transition is like, wow, you know, the whole thing is just amazing. So what I'm suggesting is that, so it's not about one miracle. It is inevitably about going, okay, so what is the thing you're assuming? It's impossible to say anything without assuming something. That's why parsimony, the Occam's razor, is such a good principle, which is like, well, assume the least and you've got the least chance of being wrong. So assuming the one is becoming two is a lot less than there's a big mind that's unconscious that's dreaming up the universe to know itself. That's assuming a lot, which is what I was doing, which is why I rejected it. So now what I'm saying is, look, it looks to me like this is a process of becoming. It goes down to the simplest thing. And the simplest thing is the Tao is becoming in relationship with itself, let's say, or the field of being is the non-dual is two. And from that comes everything. So that's the simplest statement that I can make. When did that happen? You can't ask that. It's before time. Why did that happen? There's no intentionality. You can't ask that. What caused it to happen? You can't ask that. There's no causation. And those are hard things to grasp, because if you want to ask those questions, I want to ask those questions. But when you see the vision, you go, oh yeah, you can't ask any of that. What you're coming back to, it's not like the miracle where something came from nothing one day, because this is before time. Time itself is an emergent quality. Everything is an emergent. What you're saying is the nature of what this is something that could be anything, is becoming everything. And my guess would be this is not the only universe it's doing it in, and there may be things which we wouldn't even be able to call universes. Who knows? But that there's that something that could be anything has become this. That's really what I'm saying. And that's if you want to use the word Tao or the field of being, or even calling it being is it's like it's non-dual. So it is zero and it's one. It's, but you know, you could see it paralogically or paradoxically, if people don't know that word, as either of those things. Because when you look at this, you go, well, what makes it one? Well, everything exists. It's one field of being that's become everything. But in itself, you go, well, what is that quality of being then that everything has? Well, it's kind of nothing, isn't it? It doesn't have any quality. So it's kind of, it's both paradoxically something and nothing. It's empty and it will become full of everything. And those are the sort of ways that we have to wrestle with it, I think, now, to get the nature of what this is. And then we get rid of any idea that there's some pre-existing thing that already exists in some way we can't understand, and blah, blah, blah. And we just go, well, look, this, yeah, I've said it. We can, it's not about a miracle where something comes from nothing. That is still the old way of thinking that we need to leave behind.
Okay, so I think I understood this better after episode 21, The Origins of Everything, I think it was called. Okay, and what you seem to be saying there is, okay, there are these two explanations you could have for this inexplicable thing that we exist. Okay, but the reason that you're going to one and not the other is around parsimony, acknowledging that could be wrong, could be something else, could be a pink elephant that brought the universe into existence. But it seems like parsimony, like Occam's razor, these philosophical principles, would lead a person down a certain road to the position. Is that correct? That you think it's
one of the things. You know, you can call it parsimony. You can call elegance is quite a nice word for it. I think it's just that there's a way. It's because what it does is it assumes the least. It's so little, and it assumes something which is evidently true, which is the one is in relationship to itself in the sense that the universe is a unity and it's in relationship as everything. So it's assuming something you absolutely know in the moment is absolutely true, and traces that back through all the relationships to the primal relationship, and ends up somewhere, like I said, that the Taoists got to, and not just the Taoists, also the Kabbalists and various other people a long, long time ago, which is there's a fundamental duality, and there's a non-duality arising as duality. And going, okay, let's put that in the modern context. We can add that fits perfectly with the informational understanding of physics, and it can lead to this idea of an emergent universe that ends up with spiritual dimensions as the most emergent, which is what we're exploring. And you get something which is so profoundly, the overall vision is so profoundly simple, and yet there was a lovely phrase I came across, Richard, from Georges Lemaitre, the guy who developed the first idea of the evolutionary universe 100 years ago. And he talked about science looking for comprehensive simplicity. And I love that phrase. It's not just science, it's everything. It's like to have, so you're looking for an idea which is fundamentally elegant and simple, but it's comprehensive because it can include within it so much. So for me, the idea that this is a process of becoming, that's what existence is, or this is the evolution of ever more emergent levels of reality. It's a realization of greater and greater possibilities, all of that. That's so profoundly simple, but it's comprehensive because within it, it can include everything from your dream last night to the existence of Alpha Centauri to the existence of the number 3. All of that can be part of one process.
Okay, just finish this section off for me by explaining, and you may have already said a lot of this, but just what's wrong with my analogy then of the daffodil bulb has the information to become the daffodil, and therefore the seed of the universe has the information to become the universe. So I'm assuming you would accept the daffodil bulb has the information, but there's something wrong when I carry that over to existence at its moment of
Yeah, because
being.
the seed is a complex thing that's evolved through this complex process of evolution. So you could also say your embryo or your fertilized egg or anything like that. It's like, well, yeah, that's right. Now, you could make an argument, and I'm not against this, to say that our universe was born from a previous universe. And I think that's perfectly plausible. And I am not a physicist enough to really come down heavily, but it wouldn't surprise me because that's how things work. Then, yeah, you could. It may be their seed analogy would work, but then you go back and you go back and you go back, and I think if that's right, you're probably going back and back and back into things which may not even resemble universes that have led to this process of emergence. Perhaps. I have no idea. I'm just open to all of this. So that the problem with the analogy is you're starting with too much. The seed is already a complex of information. What I'm saying is you go back way before the seed and back and back and back before there's life. Okay, so the seed has come from the evolution of life. So you go back before life, you go back, you're into matter. Oh, before matter, you're into information. Before that, you're just into what we study with mathematics, primal relationships. And then you're back to, the one is two, or the one is in relationship with itself, or the Tao is yin and yang, or the non-dual is becoming dual. And it's that thing of it's becoming that. So that the foundational idea is not there is nothing and then one day there's something. The foundational idea is this is a process of forming. That's what reality is. That's what, or reality is a difficult word. That's what everything is. So you've come back to that.
So I'm going to do one more. Do you think that existence is necessary then? Because I find it very strange, right? I wrote a poem once, if not confronted by overwhelming evidence to the contrary, I would simply never believe the absurd statement that this is. Because the overwhelming evidence to the contrary is that, well, we're here, so we can't really deny it. But sometimes I can be struck with that sense of like, isn't it just bizarre that there's something rather than nothing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you positing that the one becoming two, it seems to be because we exist, there must be some necessary process at the core of it, that there must be a one that becomes two.
Yes, I think so, but it's hard to express it clearly, I have to confess. So I struggle to try and put this across in a way that feels eloquent still, but I am working on it. And it comes down to that paradox, so that the ontological origins of everything is fundamentally paradoxical, but not in some, it's a paradox way, but in getting, so if it's nothing, I can try and say it like this. I'll do my best. If you say it's nothing, well, nothing by definition doesn't exist. So that doesn't exist. So what does exist? Well, something, or being, existence exists. So you're left with that paradox that what we've got here is something which has no qualities in itself, and therefore is in that sense nothing, is becoming, and therefore it is being. So the ground is being because it is becoming. So the one is one because it is two. And if it wasn't two, it wouldn't be one. It would be nothing, but nothing doesn't exist. And you can see, if you go into that little spiral of paradox, which is all mathematical in a way, you've got, there you go. Okay, so the one exists because it is two, because if it wasn't two, it would be nothing. And that's a sort of necessity. And then you can see from that, it's going to come all of the necessary relationships we study with mathematics, where they're all implicit in each other. So they're all implicit. Bang, 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 bang. That's what mathematics studies. It's not contingent. And yet, that fundamental duality is an either or, as well as a both and, but it's an either or. So it's yin or yang. So in that either or, you've got the idea of the bit, which is what obviously all computers are based on. You've got the idea of this or that. Well, that's contingent. That's the essence of probability. 50-50. Could be this, could be that. Now, that's a necessary relationship. All probabilities are necessary. You know, if you've got a dice with 6 sides, there's 1 in 6 chance it could be 5. It's necessary, but you don't know which it'll be. And so you've got inherent right there in that paradox, you've got it's 0 and it's 1 and it's 2, and it must be all those at once, otherwise it wouldn't be any of them. And it's both necessary, all the relationships of maths, okay, and it's also contingent. It's probabilistic. Could be this, could be that. And that probability is going to increase into a probabilistic universe, which is what we live in, which is what you see in quantum physics. That the quantum physics is we can study it minutely, but how it will turn out, we don't ever know. And that's because it's probabilistic. And then you get a universe like this, which is also governed by passivity now, all of that rigidity, that habits that have developed, and yet it remains probabilistic always. It's governed by entropy, which is all about probability, and it's arrived at this stage now where I can guess what you might say next, but it's all probabilistic.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
It does, yes. It is. I'm
and
finding
can you see a kind of beauty to that? Because I see a beauty to it. It's like, oh wow, yeah. It's hard from this human level, and I just mean from the level where we've got ideas. All of our ideas have developed primarily to deal with our human experience, of course. So now we're trying to look at things which are way before our human experience with the best ideas we can manage. But to get to that point where you go, oh yeah, it must be 0, 1, and 2 at the same time, and implicit in that is all of the structures that will come up everywhere in sacred geometry and all of that, and the probabilistic nature which will come up in the creative universe. The fact that it's not all determined and fixed; it's creative, and all of that is there right in that ontological origin. It's that's your seed. That's it.
Right.
As simple as that.
Okay, I want to press the fast forward button, and a considerably large fast forward button. I'm going to go right through the formation of atoms and galaxies and whatever other gaseous clouds exist, to life on planet Earth, through the Cambrian, whatever it was, explosion, up until the arising of humans living in small groups, I suppose, because I want to come on to your chapter on ethics. And the consistency there is often in theistic versus atheistic debates. The questions are around existence, and they're also and whether you can have existence without some theistic entity, and they're also centered around ethics and whether you can really have ethics without a god. So, would I be right to assume that going back to the Laughing Jesus, lucid living era, and I actually, do you know what? I'm saying assume, I don't know, right? A sort of theistic position, which I may have assumed you would fall into, was there was something in that big mind at the origins of things. Its nature was love. And therefore, as it dreams itself into being a cosmos, and as humanity arises in that, then we find these ethical principles which we butt up against in the ways we might butt up against the laws of physics or the laws of economics, because you're encountering thoughts. And God thinks that uh, gravity should work a certain way, so it does. And God thinks that we should treat each other in an ethical way because God is love, and therefore those ethical rules are real in that same way. And I think that's a theistic position. I'm curious if it's kind of the way you conceive of ethics, of like love and ethics at the beginning and then manifesting outwards. Um, and that then is not necessarily adverse to an evolutionary view. So I know that like a lot of theistic thinkers have adopted evolutionary psychology because it, in certain circumstances, it tends towards cooperation. So this idea of like everyone in a tribe just killing each other to get to be the alpha male, to have access to all the women, those kind of tribes fall away because there's too much internal conflict going on, as compared to a tribe where people learn to cooperate. And what you have in the cooperation is the arising of love. Parents that take care of their children more and don't just leave them out to be exposed tend to have those children grow up more. So there's a sense in which through the evolutionary process, you can see love winning, maybe. Okay. And that can fit in then with the theistic view. Obviously, that's because God created it that way. Okay. So I guess my opening question is, did you have that more theistic view of ethics prior to the starting of this project?
I don't think I thought about it, Richard.
All right.
I think what I thought was I experienced this big loving intelligence, and I experience it as love, and it's coming to know itself. Just that. I don't think I went, well, where does ethics come from or anything like that. But I did feel like, oh, when I'm in touch with it, I become very loving, and I think what really matters is love, and that we're good to each other, and that's as far as I got, I think, at that early stage.
Right. Okay. So the position you've ended up in is one that I would say is pretty compatible with evolutionary psychology in explaining why we're not all running around killing each other all the time, but actually cooperation in groups, and to a degree cooperation between groups, actually works and is more functional than the fictional dog eat dog world. You do not feel on a felt or aesthetic level that there's a loss in that, because the common theistic complaint would be, if you remove the God at the beginning, well, yes, you can still have what appear to be ethics, but really it's just advantageous behavior, and love doesn't mean anything, in a sense that the mother is not looking after her child because it's connected into some greater universal sense of love. The mother is looking after her child and has that sense of love, but it's just the love is just tricking her, right? And the theistic interpretation of love is really just an evolutionary trick. Like, we believe this is big God in the sky looking down upon us because it allows us to act in more ethical ways when we're not being watched by our fellow humans. Okay, so as tribes get bigger and less connected, then a more kind of theistic notion of God comes in. So it's purely just stories for selective advantage. Okay, when what's really going on there are certain chemicals that are tricking us into creating these narratives, in order that we do cooperate in groups, and we have a sense of an honor code arising out of that, and then a theistic codes that go beyond honor into love and oneness and cooperation that allow, and groups that adopt those, they're functionally advantageous. So groups that adopt those do better, and that's why ultimately you go from little tribes in Europe warring it out through the Ice Age to monotheistic religions taking hold, like Christianity, and these kind of monotheistic religions covering the face of the earth now, because they're selectively advantaged. But beyond that, it doesn't really mean anything about love being more important than hate or malice or anything else. If it was the case that violence was a more effective evolutionary tactic than cooperation, we would have war gods running the world now. So in the position you've adopted, do you feel that you lose any of the reality, the meaning, the sense of like there is something true in this notion of love, the way a theist would criticize an atheist for doing? Or do you not feel that?
Well, I think you've perfectly articulated the two views I'd like to reject:
Right.
the kind of reductionist view, and then the mythic religious view. So I'm reminded, the thought that came to my mind first of all was watching Richard Dawkins, who, in terms of his understanding of the universe, I both really admire and fundamentally disagree with at the same time. And I just remember seeing one of his TV programs talking to a Christian fundamentalist in America, and just saying, really putting the opposite point to him, just going, but are you saying then, you saying you wouldn't do these terrible things, you wouldn't rape and murder and do it, if it wasn't for the fact that God was telling you not to? And the guy went, yeah, that's right. And it was like, it captured that kind of, hang on, you're saying this is more moral, that you're doing it because you're being told to by a higher power, not because you feel in yourself, I don't want to do that to other human beings. Surely that's more moral. And so you can see that paradox there as well to be explored. So my position, first of all, I don't think, I think it's more complicated than, love has turned out to work. I think actually the story of human evolution has been the continuation of the process that every single other system in the universe has had, which is every system needs to hold together its integrity and get what it needs from its environment. And as long as it can do that, it can sustain itself. And when it can't, it collapses. And I think that's gone over into, well, obviously the human organism. I've got to hold together Tim. I've got to get what he needs to exist. And as long as I can do those two things, Tim continues. And I think that's right for human communities as well, which is why you see from a very early stage that the human communities develop two things from the evolutionary process. One is, if you can work out how to really cooperate within successfully and hold your community together, you will thrive. And part of that is you need to expel anything within your community, which is causing you a problem. Hence, they can be quite brutal for those that don't go along with the collective. But it's fundamentally holding together law and love, but that takes a while. And then you need to get what you want from your environment. And very quickly, human groups realize that the quickest way to get what you want from your environment is to take it from your neighbors. So that those that are kind within and willing to be unkind without do very well. And I'd say the whole of human history is an evolution of that. And what's got bigger is the group where you're kind within and then you're unkind without, because they're not us. Now you can trade with them and we can get, but if that works, fine. But ultimately, the history has shown the easiest way is you take it and you take them. I mean, slavery right from the beginning, from Neolithic times. So that's what we're wrestling with our ethics. Our ethics is, who are we? Who is the group and that we're kind to? And how do we deal with the fact that we have evolved through this natural process to really like kindness within, but also to really like unkindness without? And we're wrestling with that. That's our moral dilemma. So that what's happening, I think, with evolution into the individual is that we're going, oh, there's a fundamental oneness. I'm not just part of this tribe, whether it's my race or my religion or my politics. Actually, there's a fundamental oneness with the whole of existence, the whole of nature, and all of humanity. And then we have to wrestle with, okay, how can we bring that love in wisely in an evolutionary world, given the fact that we're living in a world where all those levels of evolution that have existed before still exist, and many of them are dangerous. And then out there and within ourselves, there has been this, there's been a pleasure to unkindness as well as to kindness. And that's what we're working with. That's the shadow. And I think we're doing it by sublimating it. I think, I don't get pleasure from hurting people, but I kind of like it when the baddie gets taken out in a movie. And bam, yeah, kind of like, yeah, he got taken down. And that's a safe way in which you're playing with that same thing, which has been so dominant in the human psyche. So we're trying to work on all of this. So I don't think we've lost anything. I just think you can see, oh, this is what we've got. And that ability to be kind, to see it comes from who you identify with. And the big mystical jump that happened to me when I was young, and which I continue to explore, is, oh, it's all one. And with that comes this love and this universal benevolence.
Okay, so I think I understand this better now, that you're not saying that the evolutionary process necessarily leads to oneness. Like, it could be that if we're talking about functionality, it might still be best to burn witches now and then, and it might still be best to war with our neighbours. It's not the case that the pragmatic worldly pressures lead to necessarily a state of love and cooperation and oneness.
I don't think there's anything necessary in the process. I think the only thing which is necessary is the archetypal relationships we study with maths. Once we leave those behind, the whole thing is
Okay.
probabilistic and it's creative. Could go
So
anywhere.
the idea that we're moving towards a greater sense of love and oneness is coming from a philosophical recognition of
No,
that?
it's
No.
coming from the fact that I think now that is true. That what has happened is that in the process of evolution, around not that long ago, probably 2,500, 3,000, maybe less years ago, you get this emergence of a new thing, a God of love, which you see in the Christian tradition. Got nothing like that really beforehand. And my thesis is that we understand the history of spirituality not as the history of crazy ideas that human beings had, but actually as human beings describing as best they're able with the ideas they have at their disposal, the evolution of the most emergent level of reality. So that when they're doing that, they're now going, oh, this now exists. So a small handful of people are going, oh, we've now got another level, which is a super soul, a super system. And what defines it is that it is the big mind. It is the vast loving intelligence, which has now arisen, and it has that sense of oneness and universal benevolence. And when we touch it, it transforms
Okay.
us.
So what's giving rise to that sense of oneness is that human beings have, it's still the big mind, but it's a big mind that has emerged. Right. So we're all
Yes.
connected on some level.
No,
So,
no, we're not all connected. Well, look, everything is connected. It's all one thing. It's all one thing in relationship with itself. But we don't recognize that. Once we have the ability to pay attention, consciousness, once we can focus, at some point, and this you can see this developing around the time of the Upanishads, for instance, you can see, and Buddhism, and elsewhere too, but you see that human beings now have got the ability to what I call psi sense, to focus with the sense that allows us to read things with the psyche, to read things it can't sense in the world. And one of the things it can't sense, it can't see, it can't hear, is the oneness of being. But it can psi sense that. And that's when you get meditation for the first time. You get, oh, look, if you get rid of all the sensations, you get rid of your biological, you can focus your psyche sense, and you can become aware of something. And how does it described? It's empty. It's the sanyata. And it's the emptiness that's arising as everything. And that's where you get nirvana and samsara. You get all those ideas. So that's a moment where human beings can now do that. And in doing that, there's this opening up this, oh, wow, it's one. And you get that tradition becoming more and more explicit.
okay. So as an example, taking Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas, when he promises to reveal to you what no eye can see, ear can hear, hand can touch, and what cannot be conceived by the human mind, your interpretation of that, which I think must be accurate, right, is that, and I think it's everyone's interpretation of it in esoteric circles, is that, oh, he's pointing to the awareness in which these things arise. So the meaning of the Gnostic path, the meaning of the esoteric traditions, is to, for me to look at you and say, okay, Tim's made of matter and all this structure, and then there's a psyche and a thought, but all those things are arising in awareness, and I'm touching a fundamental awareness. And as you look into me, you're touching a fundamental awareness, and we're recognizing a shared oneness on that level of awareness. So that seems to be the thing that's coming in from the Upanishads, the first example I know of it, onwards, then through the esoteric traditions. Are you saying that there's something real in what they're in their description, but it's misplaced in its focus on it being about awareness, as if, or in that, to think of awareness as the ground? For me, what do you think is sort of true and not true about how do you how do you hear the Gospel of Thomas now?
So I would say, if I was going to be critical of my work on the perennial philosophy, which obviously I can be at length.
Still buy the books, though, if anyone's listening.
Yes, because they're good books. They're good books.
Yeah.
You know, they're good books. But if I was, so there's two things. One is that I can be critical of the philosophy that existed in these various places at the time, and that I think we need to move on. And one of the things I think we need to move on from is the idea that it's all in a big mind, or it's all in awareness, or you're fundamentally not Richard, you're a presence of consciousness, or all of that. I think that on all these things that I shared myself, as you know, for years, I think we need to move on from it. Then there's also the fact that I think I was so enamored with that particular philosophical idealism that I wrongly interpreted an awful lot of disparate traditions as if they were definitely saying that. And I'm not at all sure anymore that that was the right thing to do. I think that was my own prejudice that pushed me into thinking, and not just my own, but you could see it in other people analyzing the perennial philosophy. So, for instance, it is perfectly possible that that's what the Gospel of Thomas means, and that's how I interpreted it. But actually, in the Christian tradition, the word is pneuma, spirit, and it might be a far better translation of that to take spirit as in essence, esse, Latin, being. And that actually what they're talking about in spirit is what I now call being, not something which is conscious, but going, look, there's a fundamental oneness of being. It's also possible that in that quote, that what that is pointing to, so it could be awareness, it could be an idealist thing, it could be spirit as in being, it could be more like that. And we see that in lots of traditions. I mean, that's not a new thing that I've come up with. The Greeks were doing that, and before. And likewise, it could be that that's being referred to there is God, something which is just beyond, because you can't see God and you can't hear God. And yet you can sense, to use my language, you can sense it with your soul, with your psyche. And when you do, it's beyond anything that you can possibly, it's beyond anything you've ever experienced, because it's more emergent than you. It's an awesome experience. So my guess is it's that one, actually, that's being talked about now. And that's how I'd see it. But that temptation, so I mentioned sunyata, the emptiness, as experienced in the experience of nirvana. There's nothing in there in the Theravadan tradition that goes, that's awareness. That idea of Buddha nature as awareness is going to come much later. And it's going to come in with the Mahayana tradition, but I don't see it in the early Buddhist traditions. So it feels like there's a lot of different things going on, and they're all reflecting stages in the evolution of the soul and the evolution of our ideas, how we sense and make sense.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's true. There are aspects in your perennialist writing where I've looked at quotes over the years. I thought, I'm not sure Julian of Norwich actually belongs in the same category as Meister Eckhart. I'm not sure they're saying quite the same thing, actually. And that's true of perennialism in general. Something I did at times. It's not a criticism of your, I can totally see that. And it is, I find that very interesting, the way you put it there about the Gospel of Thomas and the way, so it's not losing value, but it's a different value than perhaps the maybe narrow value. So what I'm hearing about ethical positions, okay, is that, to summarize this, the theist criticizes the atheist because the ethics don't mean anything anymore, because they are just byproducts of chemical reactions that are tricking you into certain behaviors because it's selectively advantageous and therefore meaningless. And what you're saying is the ethics are real in some sense, but they're not real because they've come from somewhere. They're real because it does still speak to, it's not because a God at the beginning has said, like, this, I like love and not hate, and It's because there is something fundamental. There is a fundamental oneness to the universe, but not necessarily a oneness in the way you would have used to express it in terms of consciousness or awareness. But ethics are tapping into that, are speaking something real, because we're evolving towards a recognition of something that is.
Yes, but yes, but the whole evolution, even before that was arising, I think the key thing is that one is what you could call, I don't know if this is a good term, essentialist, which goes, well, if it hasn't got essentially a God at the beginning, then it's kind of doesn't mean anything. It's like when people go to me and go, well, if there was no purpose at the beginning, there's not really a purpose, is there? We just make it up. And then I'm going, no, purpose, meaning, that is all emerged. And now there is a purpose because
Right.
it's arrived now. There wasn't to begin with. And the same with ethics. It's like there was no ethics to begin with. And you can see that in the natural world. It's not very ethical. But ethics, as in terms of what is the best way that we live together, has evolved and it exists now. And you can see this is a better ethic than this is. And because
Okay.
it helps,
This is actually what confused me in the presentation of
okay.
ethics. I'll try and ask this question and conclude. Where are you standing when you use the word best? Because I think in your
Aha.
presentation on ethics,
Yeah.
you said something like, well, we've moved from sort of more violence to more love, and that's obviously better. But and I can understand where the theist stands, because they can point to God at the beginning and say, because God says so, it's better. But where are you stand? Like, and I can understand the atheist talking about selective advantage. Well, it's better because you pass on your genes more. But when it seems like you're getting out of the ground and standing in a place and saying this is better than that, and I wonder where that is that you're
Yeah, no,
where
that's
you're speaking
really
from.
good. So, so the reductionist view you're talking about, where it's just chemicals, it's like not that. It's more emergent. Everything that merges is just as real as what came before, but more emergent. And in that sense, when you use that's built on what came before. That's what I mean by emergent. You couldn't have that until you got this. Better, you're absolutely right to pick me up on it because it means it's a qualifier. It's like in what respect is it better? And we need to ask that. Now, the theist position, which goes, well, it's better because God likes it. It's like, well, maybe God's wrong. Why do you think God's right? What's it, what, maybe God's a monster. What, that doesn't make any sense. But the better I mean is that ethics is about ethikos. It's how we live together. And so how this thrives in this process of becoming. And certain ways of doing that is allowing us to thrive better. And that's not because it's really just a functional diddle run by chemicals. It's because we've emerged and we keep emerging and we keep emerging. And now this, we look, if one must judge for oneself, no one else can. You must go, oh, what is better here? And what happens, I think, is as the soul evolves, you start connecting with these higher levels of emergence and you go, oh yeah, that's better. You make that judgment call in respect of how we live. It's better. It's everything about it is, love is better, benevolence is better. And one of the things that happens is you get that same wishing well for oneself and one's family and one's tribe, which has evolved, becomes to everyone. And that's a big shift. Now you need to actually live that. You have to understand, I think, you live in an evolutionary world. So you have to have evolutionary wisdom, which makes you not naive. The biggest criticism, by far the biggest criticism I would have of myself is not philosophical. It's naivety. That, I think, has been my biggest weakness through the whole of my life. And I think it arises very easily from touching the big love and thinking, this is it. This is all you need. And it's not. You need the wisdom to bring that into an evolutionary process of becoming. And that requires a lot more. That's love wisdom, which isn't at all naive. Sorry, did that wander or did that answer your question,
No,
Richard?
that's good. I think that's a good place as an ending point for this, and maybe a starting point for something another time. Okay, because I
Okay.
think it'll be interesting. You said a lot there that other people could probably weigh in on,
Yeah.
and whether
Yeah.
that makes sense to them or not, and we could return to it. The same with the metaphysical stuff at the beginning. Do we have time and headspace for one more?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is speaking to ideas presented in the presentation on suffering and probably elsewhere too. Okay. So in terms of, enduring the horror that is my life on a daily basis and down here in the underworld, I'm basically a Cathar at heart, Tim. Um, so what redeems it? What makes it okay? And in the perennial mystical view, the view that again will be present in the Laughing Jesus, see if I can capture it, is that I might be hanging on a cross, okay, but actually it's Judas Iscariot that's on that cross, and Jesus, my real identity, he's off in the cave having a laugh. Okay, so no matter what awful conditions there are here, this is arising in a pure field of awareness that's all loving, all good, and the misery of my life is all a bit of a dream in an all loving mind. And therefore, doesn't matter what happens, no matter how awful it is, crucifixion, the symbol of the most awful thing, even that's okay because it's all love. And that's an image of redemption that you could say is the mystical or the more Eastern, that it's all okay because there's this thing that exists right now that's redeeming. Now that's in contrast to a more, what I would say, Christian idea of redemption. It's maybe in Islam too, and it might be in certain schools of the East, but not the one we think of, where redemption is not outside of time. We don't touch this point in ourselves, which is eternal and outside of time. Redemption is in time. So life might be crap now, and we might all be hanging on our crosses, but at some future point, we're going to go to heaven, okay, which is all good. And life doesn't end in terms of time. Life is eternal because it doesn't end, as opposed to life being eternal because there is an eternal now. Life is eternal because it just goes on and on and on in a heavenly abode. So there are these two different redemptive models presented. What sometimes it can sound like you're saying to me is you've made a switch from the mystical to what I'm describing as the more Christian, and say, okay, well, it's not that there is some all-loving present mind existing now at the core of your being, but life is redeemed because we're moving towards that in some sense, because that's growing, because we're going to continue on in an afterlife and move towards that. So would that be a fair or unfair characterization to say that you have moved from a model that is more akin, well, is just mystical, to a model that might not be exactly the same as, but is more akin to what you get in Christianity?
A really interesting way of putting it, Richard. So, yeah, I think probably I would agree with that. I'd probably want to say a few words about it, make it sure I got it clear. But yeah, I don't think so. So the only thing, there's pre-temporal, like I've said, look, the structures of the universe, the informational structures are before time, and they haven't gone anywhere. They're still the foundations. The field of being is nothing to do with any of that, not time, anything. So that's just is. But there's nothing outside of time. One of the big things that I'm shifting from is anything supernatural, and going, well, it's all natural in the sense that it's all one process of becoming. It's just that process of becoming doesn't end with biology, like often is thought by people in the scientific community. It just goes right into the domain of soul or psyche and goes all the way up to what we experience as God, which is a super system, a vast, living, intelligent super system. So in that sense, what I'm saying is, yes, that the ability of the soul to survive the death of the body has evolved as the psychobiological passivity or information system has evolved. That's become possible for reasons that too much to discuss now, but that's possible, and that is part of the redemption, because it means that what is of interest now is the individual, whereas before what was interested was the species. Now, so life and death, great way to evolve species, terrible way to evolve individuals, so there's no redemption for the individual. But now there is, because no matter how bad it is, no matter you're dying on a cross, that's not the end of the story. There's a chance for something good to come from it. And in the process of emergence, there is a tendency towards things getting better. What that means, of course, you have to then qualify it in relation to this or relation to that. So that's part of the redemption. And then and now what's happened is that souls in communion have started to form a super system, which is this extraordinary emergent beauty, this enormous goodwill, this vast super intelligence, and you can get to touch that. And that is happening means that God is, it's not that you're redeemed by God who's waiting for you outside time, it's what you really are. It's redeemed because you are part of the process that this is coming into existence. So your individuality is redeemed by the immortality of the soul and the fact that it can become integrated and commune within God. So it's kind of taking the traditional mystical idea and turning it on its head. That's what I'm doing generally. I'm going, hey, I think those mystics were onto a thing or two. I think they're exactly right. They just got it upside down. And the reason they had it upside down was because they did not know they lived in a process of evolution, and we do. That's it. It's going, look, they were kind of right about everything. They just had it upside down because they didn't know that. Now we do. We can turn it up the right way and go, ooh, it isn't that we are sparks of the divine, which have fallen away, got trapped in this nightmare and need to go back. Actually, We are evolving. If we're sparks, we're evolving sparks who are coming together as filaments in a greater light. And we are then, so we're also still communing with God, just like the mystic said. But in doing that, we are part of the becoming of God, not that we've fallen away and need to get home.
Okay, so I see that even in like the mystical view, redemption takes place both outside and inside time. So for example, near-death experience literature, okay, is widely consumed, and there are studies showing that people who consume it, their anxiety about death drops because there's a real reason to believe there's going to be a continuation for you and your loved ones, that you're going to be reunited in time, okay? And I must confess, like 10 years ago now, when I started doing the In the Light of Death work, I was a little bit resistant to near-death experience at the start. Not that it was true or anything, but just because I considered it to be a bit of like the idea of looking to time and looking to scientific evidence to prove that seemed to be a lesser level to me than experiencing your unbornness in this moment. So I maybe a slightly haughty attitude about that, right, which I did let go of. And so I can see the value of both. But if you today are walking through Golgotha and you find, a man hanging on a cross, okay, what are you saying to him in terms of, well, you can say, or I can see how you can say, like, I've got this book on my desk here, right? Love Knows No Death. And it's a study of how near-death experiences improve people's psychology. So you could definitely hand him a copy of this book and say,
it'd be hard though if he'd got his hands nailed to a cross,
him, right? Or you can read it out. Or whatever.
Oh, sorry.
My point is, like, to talk about
this is getting dark now.
To talk about redemption taking place in time, and okay, this is gonna and to offset suffering. Okay, like you talk about doing with a child, like a child stubs its toe, and say, okay, it's really bad now, but just wait. Okay, and you're hanging on a cross. It's really bad now. It's probably gonna get worse, to be honest, but just wait, because then death will come. And but to take the opposite, having moved away from the Jesus mysteries, lucid living worldview, what would you say about, because we used to be able to say, okay, this external kind of thing is really bad, but actually there's this consciousness within which is all peace and love. Okay,
so I want to say the same thing, Richard.
So that hasn't shifted in the sense that there is a redemption going on now in that sense.
Well, my feeling is, look, that first of all, we live in an evolutionary world. You're in immense physical pain, whether you're on a cross or suffering from cancer or whatever it is you've got, and that's shit. So that's the first thing I want to say. It's like, wow, that's horrible. God. That's awful, and some trite thing is not going to work anyway. But also, you exist on all of these levels, and you have the possibility, perhaps, to be able to focus on the most emergent level of the nature of reality, which is the most emergent level of your soul, where you can come into connection with God, this super soul. And it may not take the pain away, but by God, it changes it. So the biggest thing that I get from doing that, with the comparatively minor suffering that I've had in my life recently, has been that when I do that, it feels like there's this huge, loving intelligence which has got my back, which is holding me, which is doing everything it can for me. And whilst that doesn't take anything away, because it's not running the show, it does support me through it. So it's not like, well, just wait and it'll all turn out right. It's like, there is that actually, because, just to say it will, it's a Buddhist insight, isn't it? It will change. It's a great blessing to the suffering and a great curse to the happy. It will turn into something else. But you can also know, and that's part of what the whole esoteric tradition is about, is developing the ability to take you're conscious of what you focus on. The more you can focus your attention, the more vivid it becomes. So if you can focus your psi sensing, your sensing with your soul, on that God, this emergent intelligence, that in itself is an extreme transformation. And that's not that different than the other view of just come into being this other thing. It's like, except it's not going, you're not really this, you're really that. You're going, it's all you. You're biological, and that's where you're suffering right now, but you're also the psyche going up through all these levels of emergence, and it's all you. But if you can focus on the most emergent right now, it's probably a good idea. It might be hard, but anything I can do to help you. Do you see what I'm trying to say? It just, you don't divide the self. You're not going, oh, there's a real self and then there's this false thing which you're trapped in, whatever. So no, it's all one thing. And with the time thing, it's going, look, of course the redemption will be in, it will be in the process, because there is only the process. That's what existence is. It's the becoming. So any redemption won't be, from this view, it will be the redemption of what becomes. That's what redeems it. It can't be redemption by getting outside it, because there is no outside it. And that's why this is not about rejection. If you think redemption is outside of the process of life, then you reject life, which is what those early traditions did for completely understandable reasons. But when you turn it on its head, now you don't reject life. Now you redeem it by taking it taking it to a more emergent level.
Okay, thank you, Tim. I think that runs through everything I wanted to run through today. As listeners can probably tell, it's a lot of questions around the theistic versus atheistic position on the metaphysics, the ethics, and I don't know what you call the last one, but that one too. So very happy to have feedback on this. What I thought might be interesting for next time is I don't want to cover everything so I can move on to something.
Yeah.
And I thought it might be interesting. Okay, so one of the challenges that I don't know how you surmount in my mind, I'm not saying it's not surmountable, so I don't see it. Okay, it's like a lot of the way you've spoken about this is you're speaking to an audience who have been immersed in idealism, Advaita Vedanta, Zen in some way, and they have that metaphysical worldview, and that's like a starting point where you say, yeah, but not that this, or you could interpret it in this way. And my question for this philosophy really is what happens when you have people come through the door who are like, Tim, I've just had this mystical experience and I have no idea how to interpret it. So they don't have that grounding in Advaita. They don't have that grounding in even mindfulness meditation. And you're starting from scratch then. And you're not saying, well, let's learn this whole way that we can think about it and then say that's wrong and move on to this way. What happens? And I think that's a real challenge for any fledgling philosophy to sort of fly the nest and stand on its own in some way. So I thought it might be interesting if I were to put myself into the position of, as I was, whatever, 25 years ago, of having had experiences and wanting someone to explain them. And can you do that without recourse to the
I think that's a great idea. And I'll give you a one-line answer now as a taster.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's so much easier.
Right, very good.
It's so much easier.
So great. Anyone has any input on that prior to doing it? Happy to hear it. And of course, input. And so I think we've left the big point today at places where, as I say, there can be conclusions or there could be foundations, further inquiry. So happy to hear any feedback on that. Tim, my dogs need walking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Fantastic questions. I love your conversation with you, Richard. It's perfect. Wonderful.
Thank you.